The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Where, oh where will Aaron Rodgers land? Who the hell cares? But we're at that point in the year where this is what we yak about. Baseball's getting underway, and there's some rumblings about a work stoppage. Not this year, not next year, but before the 2026 season. And the players have always come out on top. These work stoppages go back to 1972. But this time around, yeah, it's moving in the direction with the economics of the sport where the players may not come out on top this time. We'll get to that and a whole lot more. Plus, Rick Pitino. Interesting series on him going on Vice. And some of the excerpts came out, and you wonder why he has been so successful. You'll get a little bit of a picture of that coming up. But, let's get started with the baseball. I guess this is news, right, that Mark Lerner says he's not selling the team. I know he said that last year and said that they weren't for sale. This was after they had it in the spring of 2022. So we're going back, nearly 3 years. Time flies. Where they had announced that they were either looking for partners or would sell the team. And Barry's Beluga reported that, no, they're not looking for partners. They're selling. They're going to sell the team. This was after the death of Ted Lerner, the owner of the team. Mark Lerner became the managing partner several years before his father's death. And reports were that the family wanted out. They wanted out of the baseball business. Their main business is commercial real estate. You know what's happened to the commercial real estate market with people working from home and everything that happened during the pandemic and how that changed things in the office dynamic. But Mark Lerner said last year, no, forget about it. We're not going to sell the team. Now, Ted Leonsis has his nose pressed up against the window. He says from time to time, well, yeah, they're not selling, but, we're going to be interested in making an offer at some point. What Ted wants is the games for his network. He wants it for Monumental Network, and they have the ability to do that with 2 channels. They could run both the Orioles and the Nationals. They could get that done. But Lerner said to Barry's Beluga yesterday, quote, our commitment is to continue to go forward. A sale is not on the list of things we worry about. We're excited about the team. We work too hard to get it, and we love what we're doing with it. And so unless something different happens, now that could be a sentence that you'd parse, unless something different happens along the way, we're in it for the long haul. The long haul being, who knows? That could be this year and next. It could be 10 years. It could be 20 years. Who knows? I mean, there are generations of Lerners who I guess could go on to run the team, and that is a very much of a possibility. But what you hear from people and people I know who would know, they say, oh, no, there's infighting in the family, that Mark wants to keep the team and the rest of the family would like him to sell it. But what Mark Lerner is saying to Barry's Beluga is, no. Have a little patience here. We rebuilt once before. We'll do it again. And he said this, and, you could take this for what it's worth, but they spent basically bupkis in the offseason. They brought back Josh Bell for like $6 million. What Barry has here in the story is the Nationals were in the top 10 in spending in 7 of the 8 seasons from 2014 to 2021. Those were years where they were contending or expecting to contend. 2021 would have been only 2 years after winning the World Series. But then they began a purge of veterans and trades for prospects. They haven't signed a player to a significant multi-year deal. According to Sports Track, their 2025 payroll ranks them 24th of 30 teams, and that includes money being paid to Steven Strasburg, who, signed that $245 million deal and then retired. So but a chunk of that is going to him. The Mets, the Phillies, the Braves, all National League East rivals rank 1st, 3rd, and 8th in payroll. Now, there's 2 ways you could look at it. One is, if they want to compete with those teams, they got to up their spending. On the other hand, if they're going to spend a lot, it doesn't guarantee them anything and doesn't mean that they're going to be able to contend with them. But this is what Lerner says about Mike Rizzo. Quote, When Mike calls me and says we really need to think about it for next winter, we'll talk about it. Right now, he doesn't think, and I agree with him, there's no point in getting a superstar and paying him hundreds of millions of dollars to win 2 or 3 more games. You got to wait until guys like Jason, that would be Jason Worth, who was their first big free agent signing when they were, trying to get off the ground. About, 2010, I believe, is when he came here. He says you got to wait until Jason. Jason was right on the cusp of the team being really good, and it took us to the next level. That's the ideal situation. It's always on your mind. Okay, all right. So that's where they are. They're also fighting it out with Masson. Lerner says he can't talk too much about it because it's still being handled in the courts. But the judgment was, and I don't know why they haven't received this money, that the money they were due between 2022 to 2026, $320 million. There was other money that they were owed as well. So that's a continuing battle which they've had to deal with since they bought the team midway through the 2006 season. So that's the Lerner point of view on this. In the meantime, the global view in baseball is this is getting to be, kind of a financial issue here, a big problem. One, the ESPN contract, which they pay Major League Baseball $550 million a year to televise games, which in comparison to football is a pittance. Now, ESPN doesn't have the World Series, so that's maybe a factor in this. That still belongs to Fox. But according to people who follow these kind of things, it's in the best interest of ESPN to opt out of this. There's no way they can recoup what they pay out in rights, and they're not in the business of losing money, and especially on baseball, which has proven to be really a low-level interest sport. It's hard to imagine this. Ratings were up a little bit this year for the World Series because you had the 2 big market teams and the Dodgers and the Yankees, but the year before they averaged 9.1 million a game for the World Series. That's half of what the women's basketball final got. That's not good. And the economics are suggesting that these, salaries that are being paid out, you get the big headline like the 15-year, $765 million deal that Juan Soto got for the Mets. But by and large, teams are not spending. And Scott Boras, who's working both ends of this, he's the one that got the deal for Soto. But he's looking at his other clients, and they're not getting offers. And he said this last night about the state of spending in Major League Baseball.
And when we look at the number of teams that spend above 50%, you would guess how many? You would think a lot. No, it's a very small number. When you look at the number of teams that spend 40% or below, you're going to find, shockingly, some amazing. The Yankees spend 40%. They used to spend 55%. You're going to have Boston in that area, but you've got a number of teams that are spending below 100 million. For example, last year there were 6 teams spending below 100 million, and the money they get from the general fund is above that. So we really need to have a competitive commitment measure, a metric to say, on your 40-man roster, how much of your revenues are you spending?
Well, here's the problem with that, Scott Boras. He's fetching about teams not spending 50% of their revenue on salaries. If you had a salary cap, that would be enforced. That would be part of the agreement that you would have to spend 50%. But when you don't have a cap, then there's no floor here. There's no minimum that teams have to spend. And that's where you get into the big argument whether baseball should have a salary cap or not. And at this point, the Players Association may be cutting off their nose to spite their face because when you got these circumstances like the big market money teams spending wildly like the Mets and the Dodgers and Red Sox just signed Alex Bregman to a big deal. Those teams are the haves, and the have-nots are going, well, what would be the point? If we spent $100 million more, we still wouldn't be competitive with those teams. So what's the point of that? Plus, we've seen teams like the Cubs and the Astros tanking in recent years and having great success because they were able to do it. So that seems to be the formula. That goes away if there's a salary cap. Now, the collective bargaining agreement that's in place right now has no cap, and it doesn't run out until December 1st of 2026. So you got 2 more seasons under this. And although you can look at the Dodgers and the Mets with payrolls over $300 million and say, well, this is the key to how it's done, it's not motivating for the owners to get close to that because they're not going to be competitive with them. And we've seen that, like in the NBA, when you tank, you can get players and you can build your roster into a team that can contend down the line. Now, Tony Clark is the executive director of the Players Association. He's a former player. And there is now a buzz throughout camps in Major League Baseball. Bob Nightingale writing about this in USA Today, that a work stoppage is coming, that the owners are ready to lock them out until they get the salary cap. And Clark says, the head of the Players Association says, I'll say this, the league has been interested in a salary cap for decades, and our position has been the same for decades. Instead of moaning and groaning about the Dodgers' $390 million payroll or the Mets owner Steve Cohen signing Juan Soto to the $765 million deal, Clark is saying, hey, you need to do what they're doing to be competitive. He says, I have a dream that starting the year, all 30 teams would be committed to be the last team standing. Well, that's not realistic. That's just not realistic. And other teams can't bring in the money that the Mets and the Dodgers do because they don't have the media market deals because they don't exist in those media markets. And if you're looking at your league long-term and the best interest of your rank and file, not the Juan Sotos of the world, but the rank and file, which unions are supposed to represent. I've been in a union now for almost 40 years. I've been in unions before, and that's the job of the union, to look out for the rank and file. The superstars are going to get paid. That's not going to be a problem with the salary cap. Will it be a $765 million deal? Who knows? But while Nightingale points out this, there has been nearly $3.2 billion spent in free agency, pleasing the union. 8 teams have accounted for 75% of that. That's big at the top, not big at the bottom. There are 14 teams that have spent less than $45 million in an industry that generated a record $12.1 billion in the past year. If there's no floor, there's no real motivation to come up with big contracts and have a payroll that's big. Now, what you would eliminate is the Dodgers' ability and the Mets' ability and the Red Sox and maybe a handful of other teams to spend. Okay, but it might even out better for the rest of the players if you had a cap, which would also contain a floor. Clark also points out that the owners claiming poverty seems to have money for other investments. Hypothetically speaking, it's an interesting dynamic, he says, when a club says it doesn't have any money, but it's otherwise investing hundreds of millions in properties around the ballpark and then leveraging the value it creates for the club to take more money to do more with the property while running a professional ball club. Well, that's called business, pal. And if you're not telling the owners how much they have to spend in a cap, which also has a floor, then they're free to spend the money however they want to. They own the land, they own the stadiums in some cases, and they can do what they want with their money if you don't have any legislation. You say you have a dream that all 30 teams would be committed. That is a dream. That's a pipe dream. That's not realistic. It doesn't make business sense for other teams to do this. And right now, I would have to agree with Mark Lerner, where you're looking at the Mets in your division and you're looking at the Phillies, who are spending, maybe not as high as the Mets, but spending, and the Braves, who have been really smart, I think, about the way they've spent. They locked up young players to long-term deals. And Clark says that there's no reason why all 30 teams can't have the same desire to win. Money doesn't guarantee a championship, with only 4 of the highest spending teams winning the World Series in the past 25 years. So there's that, too. The owners have to look at, what are my chances to win if I spend wildly? Ask Steve Cohen about that. Steve Cohen spent more money than anybody the last few years. He hadn't won a World Series. His team went in the playoffs, went pretty far this year. They didn't get to the World Series. But all this doesn't go onto the table until January of 2026. But as I've looked back at all these work stoppages, if you go back, especially to 1981, that's when, things really changed. And the players kicked butt in that. It was a long work stoppage. It was 2 months. It covered the lockout of 1990. The owners eventually caved. We had 1995, where the owners, after the season was shut down in 94 with no World Series for the first time ever, that in 95 they wanted to have scab players, and district judge in New York named Sonia Sotomayor, who's now in the Supreme Court, said, nope, you can't do that, and the players came back. Well, now we're getting to the point where if you look at the media deals that the NFL is signing, that the NBA is signing, and that baseball is being pushed aside because they're just not bringing in the people, and the people they're bringing in are ultra-cockers like me, not the young people, the business model isn't working anymore. So Tony Clark, although he's holding on to a stance that has favored the union for all these years, it may be moving in the direction of the need for the salary cap. And if you're looking out for your membership, not the superstars, but if you're looking out for the membership, that may be the best way to do it, because then you're saying to all 30 teams, okay, Dodgers, Mets, Phillies, you can only spend so much, but Royals, A's, Nationals now, this is how much you have to spend. You're required to spend that amount of money. And that would seem to raise the level for the players who are not making, $70 million a year or whatever the Shohei Ohtani contract calls for. So that's where they are. And I don't know how you get out of that. Anyway, coming up, a couple things from Davey Martinez in spring training yesterday as they get ready to play their first game. And how about a NASCAR driver with the first name William? This is a sport where you got Billy Bobs, not Williams. And William has won the last 2 Daytona 500s. He spoke yesterday with our morning show on Sportsmanlike, and we'll play some of that conversation as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Spring training open. Nats have been there for, I think, about a week. Pitchers and catchers anyway. I think it's a full squad workout today, and then they play their first exhibition game on Saturday afternoon against Houston with Mackenzie Gore starting. I've been to spring training over the years, going back over 40 years. I remember going back in the 70s, almost 50 years when I was in college. And even then, spring training wasn't what it was invented for. It used to be that baseball players simply didn't make enough money during the season playing the sport. The minimum salary stayed at like $6,000 for decades. It wasn't until the 70s that started to change. So they had to make money to support their families in the off season. There wasn't a lot of time for working out and staying in shape. And that's what spring training was for, that you'd round yourself into shape. Well, now these guys stay in shape all year long, and spring training isn't really for that, but it's still, kind of treated as not a conditioning thing. There's running by the pitchers and things like that. But the reality is, you're just sort of, throwing it around, loosen up your arm, just get ready for the season. You don't need this amount of time. Season starts earlier and earlier, so the first game is going to be March 18th. So for some players, it's only a month of spring training. Most of them, it's like 6 weeks. Used to open the 15th of April. So you would have the start of spring training March 1st, and then the players would take the field on the 15th. But there is, there's an eye-opening thing, let's put it that way, for people who go to spring training for the first time, especially if you're, working as a reporter, as I was back in the day, is that you would see these guys and they would, throw a little on the side and they'd be done for the day. Go play golf in the afternoon. It's not the NFL training camp. It's not that way. But there is important work to be done, and we got a team like the Nationals with a bunch of young players. Davey Martinez is working on fundamentals, and with just the pitchers in camp last week, that was an important thing that he was working on with them, and is stressing how important the fundamentals are.
So the fundamentals we have to sustain the fundamentals throughout the year as well, and we've done a pretty good job last year of trying to get these guys out there with some, and you could joke around about it, but if you don't come first base the next day, you were out there getting 40 balls. You know, we have early work, and they go out there and they cover first base, and it's not really a punishment. It's just, hey, you got to do it. It's an out, right? I mean, you know, it creates. If you do these things, the big innings go away. You know, so these guys, they understand it, and like I said, they want to get better at it. When they do fumble the ball, if you could see what I see in the dugout, it's not pretty. You know, they get pretty upset about it. So I told him, I said, I don't want to see you that way, because you know what? You got to get back on that mound, you know, next inning, and you got to compete. So the best way to not feel that way is to make the play. And we'll make sure that we're going to do everything we can so that doesn't happen to us.
Hey, you know, you saw what happened in the World Series when the pitcher didn't cover first base. It led to a meltdown by the Yankees, and they come back by the Dodgers to win the series in 5. So that's important stuff. Number 2 from Martinez is Josiah Gray. Josiah Gray, I think, is representative of what pitching is all about in baseball these days. He was the centerpiece of the Max Scherzer trade with the Dodgers. He was the young pitcher who was coming over from the Dodgers, and I think he's had at least one opening day start, maybe 2, but he was the guy who was going to be the ace of the staff. Well, he made only 2 starts last year. He eventually had Tommy John surgery in July, and if he comes back this year, it's going to be like September. And he's in spring training. He's throwing the ball 60 feet, but he's a long way from coming back. But, you know, you got to look at these guys for the long haul here. And the hope is that he comes back at the end of this season, shows some promise, and is ready to be back to form for the 2026 season. This is Martinez yesterday on Josiah Gray.
He's had success at a very early age. I know he had some hiccups with some injuries, but he's an unbelievable competitor. You know, that's something that, you know, you can't really teach. I mean, he gets fired up. He's engaged. He's got a plan every time he throws a pitch. He knows himself really, really well and what he wants to do. So, you know, we just, for me and Hick and Do, and we just got to keep an eye on him and see what's really working for him, and make sure that we stay on that plan, and make sure that his routine is what he wants it to be. If we have to make adjustments later on, but right now, by sitting down with him and talking to him, I mean, he's got a great idea of what he wants to do every day.
All right, so spring training rolls on, and the Daytona 500 is over for another year. NASCAR does this differently than everybody else, and maybe picking the week that they do it is important because it's after the NFL shuts down, so they have some of the attention to themselves. They also had the ridiculous NBA All-Star game, but the Daytona 500 did eventually go off on Sunday night. And I can't imagine that even casual race fans are familiar with his name. William Byron. But William Byron is one of a handful of drivers to win back-to-back Daytona 500s. You know, in any other sport, a back-to-back champion like Patrick Mahomes, he's everybody knows his name. You don't have to know anything about sports to know who Patrick Mahomes is. But William Byron, who knows who William Byron is? He's I think one of the most invisible back-to-back champions we've ever had in any sport, because, you know, for years Daytona was dominated by, you know, family names, the Allisons, the Foyts, the Andrettis, you know, people like that. And now we have a guy who's, you know, if he walked into a room and said, "Hi, I'm William Byron," nobody would know who the guy is. And at the end of this race, which was delayed and delayed and delayed, finally on Sunday night, they come to the last lap. He's 9th, but he was in the right place at the right time and became the first back-to-back winner since Denny Hamlin in 2019 and 2020. He talked about, you know, how things fell into place for him as he went into that last lap. But when he was on yesterday on our morning show, they went a little further with him and talked about what he was doing during these long delays. You know, you'd think in a sport like this where you got to be keyed up and ready to go at any time, you're always on the edge. No, he wasn't. Listen to the story of William Byron waiting it out at Daytona on Sunday.
3 hour, 45 minutes worth of weather delays yesterday. What did you do to occupy the time?
Well, I ate a lot of snacks, ate a ton of snacks, and then I had a nap actually. So I took a nap. It was great. Definitely needed that, and then it just kind of got me through the rest of the race. So it's kind of weird once you're really nervous for the start of the race, and a lot of times when you have, at least for me, every time I have a delay in the middle of the race, I feel like it really calms my nerves, and I was able to use that and kind of get into a place where I was focused and calm, and that was nice.
William, I was listening to your post-race comments, and you made sure to give a ton of credit to your team, and rightfully so. And you also acknowledged how they had the car ready to go. The car you had this year in Daytona was different than the car you had last year. Last year's car was impounded. So give us a little bit of compare and contrast in terms of the car that you had in this year's Daytona 500 versus the one you won with last year.
Yeah, good question. I mean, this year's car honestly was a better car than we had last year. Last year we were in a backup car because we had a crash during the week and had to change over to a new car. So this year's car was prepared for months at the shop. So it probably had hours and hours of preparation. I really didn't want to crash that car throughout the week and try to keep it for the race. So just thankful for all their effort. They, the race teams work nonstop, late hours on fabricating the car to thousandths of an inch. So I wouldn't be anything without my team. They prepare the car and execute the race throughout. And it's a team sport based on how everyone works together.
It is a team sport, and I'm sure that your team was celebrating alongside with you, William. I want to focus on the partying here for a second because now you've won 2 of these. Which celebration was better or more exciting, I should say, the first one or the second one?
Oh, the second one for sure. We were able to celebrate here at the track and on the front stretch, and then was able to go to Waffle House. So that was a nice night and early morning. So I'm running on pretty light sleep, but adrenaline's a powerful thing.
And what's the Waffle House order, William, if people want to eat like a 2-time Daytona 500 winner?
Well, I have a sweet tooth, so just a chocolate chip waffle.
Nice.
Wait, we got to go back then. So you had the Waffle House chocolate chip waffle post-race. During the race, you mentioned a lot of snacks and a nap. So we need further details. What snacks and where did you physically nap during the middle of the race with the delay? I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah, so I do a lot of snacking on the weekend. I do all my working out and training during the week. But, I had some Nutella, those little Nutella cookies, biscuits. Yeah, those are really nice. So I had a few of those and then just napped in the motorhome at the track.
So, William, you're the youngest driver to win multiple Daytona 500s. You broke Jeff Gordon's record. What does that mean to you to be the youngest driver to win that race multiple times?
It's special. I mean, my career started when I was really young. I was 20 years old. So for me, it's just trying to continue to progress as a driver. And, it's a huge event. And to be able to win it a couple times early in my career is something that you can't take for granted because sometimes it takes your whole career to win this race. So very thankful for that. And hopefully I can continue racing for years to come.
We're talking with William Byron, Daytona 500 winner, back-to-back here. Now, I want to ask you a question on this. The Kansas City Chiefs just won back-to-back and then lost a third one. But they were talking about three-peat and the possibility of that. Would you like to guarantee a three-peat right now on our show?
No. I'm definitely not going to be signing up for any copyrights like the Chiefs. So I'll leave that to next year. We'll see how next year plays out.
A little hint, and maybe talking to Pat Riley, who owns the three-peat copyright. You were very aware of that just now. I just noticed that. You were very aware of the fact that you need the copyright in order to do that. All right, give us one thing before we say goodbye here. One reason that no one realizes why you won this race. You credited your team. You credited the last lap with the crash and everything like that. But one little thing that when you look back at this and say, that is actually a huge reason I won this race.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, honestly, in the race car, it's just about instinct. And sometimes you have, that kind of inner, instinct that tells you to go one way or another. And I feel like that's what was guiding us on the last couple of restarts. We just, even though typically we have data that shows us which lane to choose on the restarts, and we chose the outside lane 2 times in a row on the final restarts, and that wasn't necessarily what was suggested. So I just feel like we went with our gut there, and sometimes that's what pays off.
All right, so that's William Byron. Keep that name in mind. He's 27 years old. He's won 14 times. He's won back-to-back Daytona 500s. But if you were watching the race or you saw the finish, this is an incredible crapshoot. They drive for 500 miles. He has to wait out a delay of like close to 4 hours. And it all comes down to the last lap, and he's in 9th place, and he's on the outside while everybody is mixing it up inside, and he just sort of slides through to win. So if you're looking at him to win a 3rd straight, it's not like in this sport that anybody wins by like 2 laps. It just doesn't work that way. And it all comes down to this final mishmash at the end of the race, and he was able to come through. By the way, this is February 18th, as you may know. It is also the kind of gentlemen start your engines as we transition from the Daytona 500 back to football. It's the gentlemen start your engines for the off season, because today starts the beginning of the period of time where teams can designate a franchise or transition player. This has been a factor here for years. I don't think it's a factor here at all this year. I don't think there's anybody that they would put a tag on either way. But we went through all this mishigas with Kirk Cousins, and then the Ravens went through this last year with Lamar Jackson. I don't think either team has an issue that they're going to deal with this year. The Combine will start on the 24th. That goes through the 3rd of March. That's always at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. And then March 4th is the deadline for franchise or transition tag. And you got the Cincinnati Bengals with 3 players that they're going to try and hang on to, and one of them is probably going to be tagged. And that could be a second tag for a wide receiver, which has not really happened before. It's T. Higgins. He's set to hit free agency, and he is likely to be tagged, they say, by March the 4th. That would give him until July 15th to negotiate a long-term deal. The salary that he would play under in his second tag would be over $26 million. He played for just under 22 this past season, but he had a spectacular year. Triple crown for most receiving yards, 1,700, 17 touchdowns, 127 receptions. He's got to be the highest-paid receiver in the game right now. I think the number is like 35, I think it's 35. But I'm not sure. But I think it's in that neighborhood. And then, what are you going to do with Joe Burrow and his contract? He's already indicated that he's looking to restructure and free up some money to keep these guys. I mean, he wants to win Super Bowls. And they also have Jamar Chase and Trey Hendrickson, who are also up for free agency. Hendrickson has been a top pass rusher. So they're looking at these numbers and these dates as very important for their football team. Washington may get to that down the road, but right now they don't have any of those issues. Then after that, March 10th through the 12th, that's the period of time where teams are permitted to contact and enter into contract negotiations with certified agents of players. This is the non-tampering period, right? This is the crazy thing. Then March 12th starts the league year, and that's when free agency can begin, starting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on March the 12th. So here we are on the 18th. The next 3 weeks, some pretty important dates for the NFL as teams look to set their rosters for next year. All right, coming up in the next hour, Mike Florio on the Justin Tucker situation with the Baltimore Ravens, Dan Graziano with a lot of NFL notes, including where Aaron Rodgers may wind up. And you want to know what makes Rick Pitino the coach that he is? Well, there's a new series that's out on Vice, which gives you kind of an insight into that. We'll get to that more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. I am old enough to have seen Saturday Night Live since its debut 50 years ago, or almost 50 years ago. So I know the show. Now, it's been a long time since I would stay up late enough to watch it live, but I've seen enough on YouTube over the years to get a sense of the changing cast and so forth. I watched the 3 hour, 20-minute, whatever it was, long show on DVR last night. I wasn't overwhelmed. I have memories of the great days with Chevy Chase, the Bill Murray, I don't know. Just really didn't do it for me yesterday. I get just a couple thoughts on that coming up, plus a lot of NFL yak this hour, including the mess that Justin Tucker appears to be in, though he is denying all the allegations. We'll get to that. Here's my thought. Maybe some of the skits were not really designed for me. They're current pop culture references, which I'm not totally familiar with. I like the part where they introduced all the celebrities that were in the audience, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus was really funny because it said that she had an extra ticket. I think maybe it was supposed to be for Larry David or whatever it was, and and she had brought a support dog. And they said, well, what do you need the support dog for? Oh, he's blind. I have to tell him what's going on. That was funny. Cher was there. They said, Cher, do you have any questions? She says, no, I just got answers. That was good. John Hamm was in the crowd. Ryan Reynolds, Ray Romano, Peyton Manning showed up. Al Sharpton was there. Seth Meyers. I mean, they did a good job with that. I'll give them that. It was Amy Poehler and Tina Fey who were introducing all of them in the crowd. Sabrina Carpenter with Paul Simon made me sad. I'm not really all that familiar with her work. I'm sure she's great at what she does. But Paul Simon has reached the point where he probably shouldn't be performing anymore. I mean, Paul Simon is one of the all-time artists, one of my all-time favorites. Just great. But it in his 80s, he's just it's just time. It's just time for that. That was my feel on that. What else from the show? This is from the Post, and I agree with this. It says Saturday Night Live spent 50 years earning a reputation for political satire, but the SNL 50 show seemed to pull its political punches. There was no overt commentary about what's happening in Washington, apart from an ice joke about carting away Canadian Martin Short, and there was no President Donald Trump impersonation. Colin Jost made a joke about Trump wanting SNL to be canceled, and as mentioned, Kate McKinnon reprised her Rudy Giuliani impression, but the show was nostalgic callbacks and goofy jokes. Yeah, I felt that way too. And Meryl Streep on there wasn't that funny. Didn't make me laugh. They had some, tape bits from the early days. Chevy Chase falling down. That was it's funny. All the presidential impressions that they've had over the years, and that would date back to when the show started in '75. That Gerald Ford was president, but all the other impressions of presidents have had them made up and dressed up to look like the president. Chevy Chase was imitating Gerald Ford with no makeup. He was just Chevy Chase, trying to put the ornament on the Christmas tree, falling over a table, and it's funny that in those days that Gerald Ford got a reputation for doing that long before social media. I mean, this is decades and decades before social media started, and he had some unfortunate trips. He fell down a flight of steps coming off an airplane. There were a couple of other falls, but Gerald Ford is the greatest athlete we've ever had in the White House. He wasn't just a football player at Michigan. He was an All-American football player at Michigan. Could have played in the NFL at a period of time where, the money wasn't what it is today. I'm sure if he was coming out of Michigan today as an All-American, he'd have gone to the NFL. He might have eventually wound up in politics. But in those days, there was a choice to be made. You could work as a teacher and make as much money as you did in the NFL. So he moved on to other things. But I was just, thinking back about that and the original skit. They did a lot with physical comedy there. Chris Farley was great at physical comedy. Belushi, of course. Some of those things were good. But some of the skits were too long. I wanted more nostalgia than modern stuff. Maybe that's my age. But that was just my feel overall, and it went so long. My wife set up the VCR to tape it, and she put an extra 15 minutes on it. I guess it went 3.5, 3:45, something like that. I can watch it on YouTube. I missed the Paul McCartney performance, but I'm told that he's kind of jumped the shark in age too, that he shouldn't be performing anymore. It's one of my favorite lines from the movie Almost Famous. It's a movie that came out 25 years ago, something like that. But it's based on Cameron Crowe, who was a reporter for Rolling Stone back in the 70s. And he talked about wanting to cover the Rolling Stones and other rock groups. But he said, hey, Mick Jagger's not going to be jumping around that stage when he's 50 years old. Well, Mick's 80, and he's still performing. All right, to the NFL, and a very disturbing story that gets even more disturbing. And I go back to Tony Kornheiser's line after the O.J. Simpson trials. In the post-O.J. world, we don't know these people. And Justin Tucker has been beloved in Baltimore for over a decade. He has been the best kicker in the history of the game. He has the longest field goal, 66 yards. Till last year when he started missing, he was the most accurate of all time, also the highest paid, making more than $4 million a year. He's got a variety of local commercials in Baltimore. He's an iconic athlete there. And on top of that, he's one of the great opera singers in the world. 60 Minutes did a feature on him some years ago, and that would presumably be his next profession after he's finished playing football. But in the last few months, there's been some explosive reporting by the Baltimore Banner, which the league says it's going to look into, which the team has said that they will look into, but they haven't made any moves to suspend him or do anything like that so far. Now you've got the start of the league year coming up next month, so there's decisions to be made, not just on this, but on performance as well. Is his performance what we saw last year, missing key field goals? Is that enough to bring him back, to pay him $4 million next year? But the latest is that 7 more massage therapists have accused him of sexually inappropriate conduct. He's denied all of this, and now the count of accusers is up to 16. 16 different people have accused him of inappropriate conduct while he was getting massages. Two salons have said they have banned him from the premises, and it's getting more and more serious. And this is Mike Florio, who is an attorney, does Pro Football Talk. Here's his take on what seems to be happening now with Justin Tucker and what is the tipping point on this.
I don't know where the line is between sufficiently few that it can be brushed off by the player and his representatives as people lying, embellishing, fabricating, trying to get paid, all of the things that we often hear when someone is accused of misconduct in a setting where there are no witnesses. At some point between 2 and 16, it's hard to believe, just as a matter of basic common sense, setting aside the allegations and the denial, just as a matter of basic common sense, the sheer volume of accusations makes it hard to believe that they're all lying, that they've all teamed up, that they're all being manipulated by lawyers who are looking to make a big score. It's hard to hold that many together. With that many different people, that many different levels of conscience, it's hard to imagine all of them holding together unless they each individually believe that something happened that was objectionable. That was the case with Deshaun Watson. Once it reached a critical mass and ultimately in the 20s of accusers. And now here we are, approaching 20 with Justin Tucker. So no matter how this would ever play out in a court of law, and who knows if any lawsuits will ever be filed, no matter how this plays out in the NFL's in-house judicial system, where allegations like this are investigated, and if proven, discipline is meted out. Regardless of any of that, we're at 16. Court of public opinion takes over. And my thought was once we got to double digits, because that's where we last were, there were 9, and then there was a 10th who hadn't spoken to the Baltimore Banner, but who had retained counsel. Once we were in that range, I thought it's going to be hard for the Ravens to continue this relationship. Kickers are interchangeable. And when Justin Tucker has undergone some of the struggles we've seen on the field, particularly last year, it becomes easier to justify the basic reality of an NFL team. All the players are interchangeable parts in a football machine, and at some point they will be swapped out for a new part. And I can't help but believe that the Ravens have reached the point, especially now, where they'll be swapping out the kicker part and putting in a new kicker. They'll save money. Tucker's due to make over $4 million this year, and they'll avoid the PR headache that goes along with these allegations. The Ravens have been silent, but for the initial statement that was issued when the charges first arose. Not charges, allegations. I want to be fair to everyone here, but we have to be fair to our own common sense. At 16, it's kind of hard to look at it and say, it's all a hoax. It's a witch hunt. 16's a lot. And from a football standpoint, it'd be different if Justin Tucker played a critical role in the ongoing success of the Ravens. It'd be different if his skills were at a level where they would be hard to duplicate with someone who doesn't bring the baggage that comes from the 16 allegations. Basic football decisions get made all the time, and sometimes factors other than football are relevant to the decision. Before the latest report from the Baltimore Banner, I figured we'd get to the middle of March, start of the new league year. Tucker gets released with a post-June 1 designation to split the cap charge from 1 year into 2. I wonder at this point, can the Ravens get through the next 3 weeks or so for the new league year to begin? Or will they need to act before that? Or will they just announce that they are going to release Justin Tucker at the start of the league year? That would suffice. That's what the Jets did with Aaron Rodgers. They said last week they're moving on. They'll officially move on when the new league year begins. Nothing prevents the Ravens from doing that. So the silence from the Ravens is getting louder and louder. Some might say it's already deafening. We'll monitor it. It could be this week that the Ravens make their announcement. They'll need a plan at kicker in lieu of Justin Tucker. But again, there are kickers everywhere. Good kickers aren't everywhere, but Tucker isn't and hasn't been performing at the level that justified the contract he now has. That's one of the other factors. Setting aside the allegations, is he a $4.2 million kicker? With the allegations, is it worth the headache for the Ravens? It may sound unfair, especially if you're Justin Tucker and you staunchly deny these allegations, but how did we get here? How did we get to the point where there are 16 people who are making these accusations, especially if they're false? How does that happen? It all comes back to common sense. And for football, it all comes back to business. They don't want us to know it's a business. It is a business. And there are many considerations that shape the decisions made by a business. And one, when you're dealing with a business that relies upon people to buy tickets and show up and support the team, there is a point where the noise forces action. Right or wrong, fair or unfair, the noise at this point seems to be pointing to the Ravens taking decisive action. I'm not sure what else they would do other than move on and avoid a headache and a distraction coming from a position that typically doesn't present teams with headaches and distractions.
That's Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, essentially saying on Justin Tucker, the juice ain't worth the squeezing. Now, if this was a year ago, before he started to miss field goals as he did last year, is the outlook a little bit different? I mean, the bottom line in a lot of these things is, how important is he to the team? And Deshaun Watson was supposed to be the franchise quarterback for the Houston Texans. He had shown enough promise in his early years that he was going to be that guy for the next, 12 to 15 years. There's no C.J. Stroud in Houston if you look back on this, 5-6 years ago. But after all the allegations that came up against him in Houston with the massage parlors, they did not suspend him. The league didn't suspend him. They didn't play him. They just sat him down. They paid him, didn't play him, knew they were going to deal him. He had a no-trade clause in his contract, so he could have turned down any place that they sent him to. And he wound up in Cleveland because they were willing to give him a contract extension guaranteeing all the money. Proved to be a massive mistake, obviously, on the part of the Browns. But the Texans did something with a guy that they hoped to get value out of. At least if they couldn't have him play for them, they would send him somewhere where they could get value. This isn't going to be the case with Tucker. They can't sit him down and try and trade him. They're going to release him, or they're going to look at these allegations and investigate. The league will look into it and say, well, yeah, nothing there. But it's hard to imagine that, right? I mean, that the Baltimore Banner out of thin air goes, Who can we go after? Oh, Justin Tucker. He's got a clean reputation. He's doing commercials. He's an opera singer. So let's find 16 women who are going to come up with allegations against him. Just doesn't add up. It really doesn't. They've got women who have come forward to them, and you say, well, geez, how did these last 7 come out? Well, they're empowered by other massage therapists that they know coming forward. I'm not saying he's 100% guilty, but there sure is a lot of smoke here. And usually when there's smoke, there's fire. And on top of everything else, there's the performance aspect of this, declining performance, which happens in all kickers. As great as kickers can be, they reach a point where the team says, no, we're not going to keep him anymore. Adam Vinatieri, what he did in New England, maybe the greatest kick ever, the kick in the snow that sent the game into overtime and allowed the Patriots to go on to win the Super Bowl. They eventually moved on from him. And, the Ravens will, this issue or not, we're going to move on from Justin Tucker, and this could be the reason that they do it. That combined with performance. Without the performance issues, who knows? But I think Florio lays that out very well there. Rick Pitino is part of a series that's on Vice. They made a big NIL contribution to St. John's to help pay his players, so he's cooperating with this, and it's getting some attention. An excerpt went out yesterday, and if you want to know what's behind some of the coaching that Rick Pitino has done over his career, and he's got another successful situation going on at St. John's right now. They're number 10 in the country. They've lost only 4 games. And he's on his way back to the NCAA tournament once again. You can say what you want about the NIL, but you can also say Rick Pitino's a hell of a coach. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Whatever you want to say about Rick Pitino, and he's had some issues off the court, which are unsavory, including an incident at an Italian restaurant when he was coaching, I believe at Kentucky or it might have been Louisville. But, man, that guy, wherever he goes, he wins. He was a head coach in his 20s at Boston University. Glenn Consor, who you hear doing analysis on the Wizards games on radio and TV, played for Pitino in the 1970s. And he went on from there to Providence, young coach there. Nobody wins at Providence. He was winning at Providence. He left Providence to go to, did he go to the Knicks after that? Might have been to the Knicks, or I guess it was the Knicks. And then he went to Kentucky, and then he went to Louisville. And yes, he was escorted out of his office at Louisville for some cheating that was going on, but cheating ain't cheating anymore. The NIL, it's a whole new story. And now he's in his 70s, and he's paid the price to coach where he needs to coach, and now he's at St. John's. St. John's, tough place to win. They haven't won since Louis Carnesecca won there in the 80s when he got Chris Mullen and Walter Berry. That's not a place that's easy to win. It's a school where they don't even have dorms. I mean, that's the one, prior to NIL, it was the one school where they would pay you to go there because they gave you money for housing. And in the case of Chris Mullen, he lived at home in Brooklyn and took the subway to school every day. But Pitino's there, and he's got a team that's 22-4. They're ranked number 10 in the country, and he's giving you a behind-the-scenes look on a Vice show, which is called Red Storm Rising. And yes, they have been rising. And this is a little excerpt that they released from a halftime locker room speech that he gave at Providence with his team not playing very well. And if you want to hear Rick Pitino coaching unfiltered, well, we filtered out the bad words, but this is Pitino addressing his team, encouraging, I put that in air quotes, encouraging his team for a second-half comeback.
You guys keep blowing opportunity. Dig in and be a basketball player. Dig in. Every time you miss a shot, your game deflates. We don't care about your missed shots. Play defense. You guys keep blowing opportunity upon opportunity upon opportunity. You're like children with bad things happening. Instead of digging in and be tougher, you wilt. Where is your toughness? Where have you guys been raised that you're so weak mentally that you just give up when something doesn't go right for you? Don't you know what adversity is all about? That's the game of life, not the game of basketball. You don't get down when things go wrong. You dig in and get tougher. Your whole life's going to be adversity. Learn how to deal with it.
That's Rick Pitino. And, you know, how many times do you empty that tank as a coach during the season? I think you got to pick your spots. But clearly he saw something there that he needed to correct, and that was his little halftime speech. So I thought that was interesting to listen to. Pat Forty's got a column in SI.com today. And, boy, we grouse about this every year, but there's nothing we can do about it. It looks like the NCAA tournament, not this year and maybe not next year, but the NCAA tournament is going to go to, before we know it, 76 teams. It seems inevitable that they're going to do that because there's just too much money in it not to do it. And Forty says the momentum is pointing in that direction, that by 2026 it'll be 76 teams. And I'm 100% in line with him when he writes this. It's a terrible idea that lacks public support and, quote, fixes something that is not broken. March Madness reached its sweet spot at 64 teams in 1985. The addition of 4 more teams was a crass move by power conferences to get more of their teams in the field, and it has added no appreciable value. Further expansion adds even less. More from 40. It adds clutter. It creates a more unwieldy bracket, and woe unto those who dismiss the importance of the bracket and associated office pools to casual fan interest. That is 100% right. It's the bracket that has made this tournament what it is, because we don't know half the schools that are in it. We don't know 10% of the players that play. Even the hardcore college basketball fans, watch games and have no familiarity with many of the teams. Forty goes on to write, it further stresses the schedule of an event that fits perfectly across 3 weekends, and it further marginalizes the smaller schools and conferences who provide much of the flavor of the event. He's 100% right. They don't want a second team from the Missouri Valley Conference, where this season Drake is 23-3, Bradley is 21-6. They want a 14th team from the SEC, and a 9th team from the Big Ten, and an 8th from the Big 12, and a 5th team from the ACC, and a 5th from the Big East. That's 100% right. And what has made this tournament is Fairleigh Dickinson as a 16, beating number 1 Purdue. If you want to go back a few years, it was Virginia as the number one seed, losing to UMBC, which had never happened before, that 16 had never beaten a 1. Those are the things that you like to see. But you're going to see less of them because there's going to be more big conference schools in the tournament, which is what they want, means more money for the conferences. And they've taken something that 40's right. When it was, obviously it goes back, if you want to go back 50 years, over 50 years, when they had only 25 teams, and Maryland was one of the best teams in the country, and they lost in overtime to eventual champion NC State. They didn't get in. That was ridiculous. Okay, they went to 32. 32 was pretty good. It was better than 25 with that large teams getting in, but it wasn't quite enough. Then they went to 48, and when they went to 48, there were first-round buys, and that really didn't fit perfectly. 1985, that was the year that Georgetown lost to Villanova. 1985 was the year they went to 64, and 64 fits perfectly. The tournament starts at noon on Thursday. You have 16 games on Thursday. You have 16 games on Friday. You play 8 games on Saturday, 8 games on Sunday, and then you go to the second weekend and you do it again. And you narrow it down to the Final Four. The extra stuff that takes place now Tuesday and Wednesday in Dayton, okay, there's some interest. But the real interest in the tournament picks up when it gets to the number that it should be, at 64. And now at 76, you're going to cram 4 more teams in there, which means only 2 more games. I understand that. But that means you're going to have tournament play all day on Tuesday, all day on Wednesday. And then you really get to the good stuff on Thursday. And if you're, saving your days off or your non-productive office work, you're going to save it for noon on Thursday, not Tuesday and Wednesday. And it's something that the public does not want. They're also going to do this for football, too. They went to 12 this year. I would argue that 12 is too many. Too many of the games were blowouts, and they're too long. It's not like basketball where they get these games in 2 hours. Their 4-hour games are too long. But they're going to go to 16 for that, too. And when they get to 16, are they going to start talking about 32? You bet they are. And that's just what the NCAA does. It's just how they roll. Caitlin Clark's agent said something the other day, which is 100% correct. It is not possible to fully compensate her for what she has meant to the WNBA. Despite all the grousing of these players that she's getting too much attention, she's making $78,000 for this upcoming season. Now, the numbers are changing a little bit because they've really upped the value of the TV deal that they have. It used to be $60 million. Now it's going to go to $2.2 billion, so they're going to get more money down the road. But for now, he's 100% right. And in this story on ESPN, an economist at Indiana University, Columbus, was interviewed by the Indianapolis Star, and they calculated that Clark was responsible for $36 million in economic impact to the city of Indianapolis and almost 27% of the league's economic activity for last season, including attendance, merchandise sales, and television. So there's some raw numbers for you players. Say, it's not all about Caitlin Clark. No, it is. And finally, this. It's never too old to learn something new. And a woman by the name of Loretta Chamberlain, who just celebrated her 104th birthday in upstate New York, had a birthday wish for this very unusual birthday. Very few people live to be 104. But she wanted for her birthday present to visit the Livingston County Jail in upstate New York. She was, in fact, there for handcuffs, a meeting with a canine dog. They put her behind bars briefly. They took her mugshot. It's what she wanted because she said she had visited in her nursing home a coffee with a cop social event, had heard a lot about the jail and wanted to experience it. She says she's been reflecting on when she was a little girl in the 1920s. Remember, she was born in 1921. She spoke about her time growing up during Prohibition and blue laws, which barred certain businesses from operating on Sundays. She was curious about the jail at 104, and she got to see something new. Like Tim Kirchin says about baseball, as many games as they play every year, every time you go to a ballpark, you could see something new. And here's a woman at 104 and said, I've never been to jail before. I was interested in listening to what this officer had to say about it, so I wanted to experience it. Good for her. Good for her. You're never too old to learn something new. All right, Bram is coming up next, and I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.